If you want to build a future that reflects those values, start voting for people that reflect those values and start helping them get elected.
Let's do it. Welcome to a Plan for That podcast with a very special edition where we want to say thank you so much to Vinny Chant. We wish him well in his huge projects that he's working on. And I want to introduce my new co-host, who you have seen on Twitter and possibly read his amazing, eloquent writing on Medium, Ryan Nelson-Cain. Ryan, I am so glad to have you here on A Plan for That. Why don't you tell the people a little about you?
Yeah, for sure. I've been a guest on here before, so it's nice to step into the co-host role here. There's not a ton to know about me, really. I'm a normal guy. I just have a lot of ideas and opinions. And as far as my background, I coach speech and debate. I work in a situation where I work with people a lot. I'm a former Republican. I was a Republican almost my entire life. I jumped ship in 2016 and started swimming left. That's really the primary things to know about me. If we're going to talk about who I am on the pod. Former Republican turned progressive. I love to write. I love to speak and to coach. There's really not a whole lot else to that.
And our introduction happened to everybody on episode 10 when we met Ryan, and you got to hear about how he started off as a libertarian and what specifically was his path in determining where his political home kind of lies. And Ryan, I just have to give a shout out to that article that you wrote about the Christian movement going forward. Do you want to say a little bit about it, or should we just tell people where to find it and make them go read?
Well, sure. You can find it on medium.com. It's under Ryan Nelson-Cain. It's just my name. Here's the thing. My parents are very conservative Christians, and I come from a family that spent a lot of time in the church. And for a long time, I thought that my path was going to be one that led me to being a servant of Christ and that I would be in church leadership. I wanted to be a pastor for a long time. And part of that was the ability to speak and write and have my words be heard in a meaningful way and to help people. And the other part of it was that I really understood and was well read on the messages and the words. And I grew up in this sort of, service first way. And part of that comes from the way that my family taught me. So when I move left and politics really become my religion of sorts, and I'm not really a religious person anymore, I really haven't been to church in a long time. You don't lose the understanding of the messages. You don't lose the teachings that you got when you were a kid. And some of the things that I wrote about, and if you want to go check it out, that's great. I really lay a Christian case for progressivism. I'll give you the bullet points here. You can go read the details, and I use scripture to back it up. I use the founding documents to back it up. But if you wanted to give it a read, the bullet points are this. First of all, we are supposed to help people as Christians. Christians are supposed to be a people of service. And if we're going to have a representative government, part of that means that we have to be represented in that service. We have to have a government that is willing to help us in that service. And we may not be able to declare Christianity as the state religion, and that's a good thing. We're supposed to welcome people with differences. But if we want to be a Christian nation, with air quotes, the best way to do that is to be representative in service to people and to use whatever means we can to make people's lives better. And the method that I want people to think about that in is whatever we can do to help people on their pursuit of joy, on their pursuit of happiness, because that's one of the rights laid out inalienable in our Declaration of Independence and in our founding government philosophy is the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of joy really is the pursuit of God. And if that's the case, then we have a moral, philosophical, religious obligation to have a government that works to make sure that as many people have an opportunity to chase joy as possible, not just to survive, but to live a life where they are free to chase the things that bring them joy and bring joy to others. That's the Christian case for it. If you want the details, you can go read it at medium.com/Ryan Nelson-Cain. That's the gist of it. if anybody has any questions about it, you can hit me up at Sweet K Music on Twitter.
Absolutely, Ryan. And I got to tell you, when I was reading this article, you guys, I was equal parts inspired and moved, as well as just kind of a little bit of shade that we could throw at certain Republican senators who are quoting Bibles at us instead of looking at the teachings of Christ and how far away from them they are when people are begging for food, starving, looking for help financially in a pandemic. Ryan, it hit where it hurts. And I just really appreciate your words. And I think it's a call to action, not only for building the movement that we're discussing, but for electing people that are going to uphold the values that he writes so beautifully about.
Yeah, and the other thing too, you mentioned the Republicans that are they're talking about Bible verses and they're quoting Bible verses, and Marco Rubio posts a verse a day or a week or whenever he thinks to do it because it's politically expedient for him. I address that too. And part of the thing that you have to realize is that the people that use faith as a gateway to power don't understand faith. And they don't understand the basic tenets that they're trying to quote. If your service to others is only that you want the ability to help them without telling them what you're going to do, that's not service. It's not leadership. That's seizing power. That's being dishonest. It's using the word and being a false prophet. So, like I said, I'm not the most religious person, but I have a deep understanding of what these things are and what they mean. It's nice to be able to still dive into it a little bit, dive into the scripture stuff, and still be able to make the point that if we want to have a Christ-like citizenry, we need to have a Christ-like government.
Absolutely. And, I couldn't agree with you more. I have to draw a delineation here between religious and spiritual, because I strongly feel that that's what Ryan's getting at as well. And I'm here to tell you, confession to everyone, I accept all religions as being valid and I want to understand all of them. But frankly, I don't know that I fit completely with any of them. And the closer that I feel to God is the further away I am from organized churches. No offense meant to anyone who takes it in a different way. It's just good to share ideas and be accepting of all people, of all faiths, and of all ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. The biggest takeaway that I want people to have from this is that your government should represent you. And if you want a government that is based in Christian philosophy, Christian values, you've got to be more clear about what those values are. And you've got to be more clear to everybody about what that means. Because right now, all these Christian voters are voting for things and people that don't embody those values. And it cheapens the faith, and it hurts the faith, and it hurts the overall goal, which is for most of them to bring as many people to their side as possible, to convince people that this is the right way, that this is the way, the truth, and the life, right? That these are the things that you want to convince people on. There's a certain way to do it, and what they're doing is driving people away. And you see over the last 20 years, the profound lack of faith in religion in America. And you see a lot of these people walking away from the church. You see a lot of people hurt by the church. Think about the LGBTQ community who have been deeply hurt by the church. I think about the Black community, which has been deeply hurt by white religion and what that means in this country. There's a lot of ways that the church has been used as a power tool to harm a lot of people, which is really antithetical to the way that I was raised and the way that many others were raised. The biggest lesson, if you read it, thank you. But if you don't, the biggest lesson that I want you to take away from what I'm saying is, if you're a Christian and you want your religion, your principles, your values to be represented in government, you need to be a lot more careful about who you're electing.
Amen. Very, very well spoken. And I feel a perfect segue into a shout out for Reverend Raphael Warnock here. The gentleman is just absolutely amazing in his leadership, in his messaging, and what Reverend tweeted out today. If you saw it, Ryan, I know a lot of people did, so you probably did too. He said, I'm so glad that Kelly Loeffler is listening to my sermons. She'll really enjoy the one that is about loving your neighbor and how important that is, and how that doesn't mean trying to rip healthcare away from millions of people who are suffering during a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I honestly, if you're looking to support a man who honestly lives into these values, you can go to fairfight.com right now and donate. You can volunteer through there. You can go to Vote Save America and adopt a state in Georgia and volunteer, make some phone calls, make some texts, get your kids doing it too, get a competition between your high school debate teammates, get them on the phones, man. This is, if you want to build a future that reflects those values, start voting for people that reflect those values and start helping them get elected.
Absolutely right. Because if we don't, you guys, we're looking at the Lindsey Graham situation, which is someone who says they stand for values and then stay with us. We've got a little short break and then we'll get to what is going on in South Carolina.
As a pastor, part of my job is to be there for families through some of the toughest times in their lives. I've counseled people through devastating health crises as they've lost jobs and livelihoods, and in recent months, loved ones to violence and disease that could have and should have been prevented. All too often, these are people whom government has forgotten or for whom it was never there in the first place. I'm Raphael Warnock, and I'll always work for you. That's why I approve this message.
Boy, Ryan, I don't know how you felt when you saw the news about Lindsey Graham and him contacting Secretary of States in multiple locations to try and throw out votes, but it had my head spinning. What do you think?
Boy, I tell you, it made me feel about the same way I feel every time I read Lindsey Graham's name in the news. It feels like upset, mostly. He has a special way of pushing my buttons. And even as a Republican, I remember this in 2016, that, when I was following that primary, when I was getting ready to vote in that primary, I was down to a few different people. Marco Rubio was my favorite. My dad liked Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham. And I told him, I'm 100% on a Lindsey Graham. The guy's a kook. I can't follow him. I won't vote for him. It turned out to be completely correct because the guy's just a sycophant. There's no leader in that man's body. There's not a single leadership bone in his body. All it is vindictive lies and slander, really. I mean, there's just nothing redeeming about him as a U.S. Senator.
I can't agree with you more. And I'm going to give a shout out to former President Barack Obama, who very wisely in his memoir that just came out said that Lindsey Graham reminds him, quote, of a spy character who double crosses everyone just to save his skin, end quote.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. I don't disagree with President Obama much. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't disagree with him much.
Here, same over here. So what we're going to talk about with our special guest here is what candidates can do, because I think a lot of people collectively heard this news, saw this news unfolding. And I don't know about you, Ryan, but my direct messages on Twitter started blowing up with candidates asking what they could do to make sure that their race had not been one that was thrown out because Lindsey Graham has a problem with people being able to vote. So Golda Velez, who is joining us today, is going to help explain what that process looks like and how that process works. She is a senior software engineer in risk and fraud. She is a graduate of Caltech, and she is a human rights worker. So she is really just the perfect person to bring in when we're talking about integrity, values. Couldn't be better for the show. Am I right, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to have her. Welcome, Golda. It's nice to have you.
Thank you for inviting me, you guys.
Absolutely. I am so excited, Golda, because I know that you and I have been talking together offline about the way that people can feel very assured moving forward. And today's news just kind of put an exclamation point on that need. So I was hoping you could maybe explain to us a little bit about how those things work.
Let me back up a little bit, explain the project that we planned before the election, and then what we can do with it right now to kind of jump on this and get ahead of it so we can get the data we need. Because, if you don't have any data, you really don't know where to look.
Absolutely. That's what I'm preferring. And you're kind of the maestro. So I want you to just roll with it.
Just for clarification, I'm not an attorney and I'm not specifically an expert on elections, but I am an engineer, a software engineer who works a lot with data and data scientists. Coming up to the election, if you are wanting to secure any system, it doesn't matter if it's ordering food, a cash register, or an election system, you need to have a source of truth. You need to have a way to verify when it has been hacked, if it is. And I think I used the example of when you connect a bank account to a new thing and the bank and the new whatever it is deposits a penny in your bank account to verify, right? Well, there are fraudsters out there who will connect 1,000 bank accounts just to get 1,000 pennies. And they will hack into systems just to connect bank accounts to them to get pennies. Now, if there's fraudsters who would do that, my suspicion is there are fraudsters who would love to control the US Treasury. So I think that we have to assume that there's going to be attacks on voting machines. Now, how do you verify if there has been an attack? The voting machines we have out there, most of them are closed source. I'm not sure about Dominion, and I'm not an expert on the voting machines. I haven't really looked into that, but I do know that ESS is definitely a closed source system. And what that means is that nobody has access to that source code. You can't necessarily be sure what it's doing. You can run it today and see what the output is, but the source code could tell when it's election day and it could decide to do something different on election day. So you really can't be sure what that machine is going to do. The best way to verify it is to have a source of truth where you can check that it did the right thing. Now, in the cases where you have hand-marked paper ballots, where the voter actually made those marks and there was a good secure chain of custody for those ballots, you can go back and count the hand-marked ballots and have human beings count them and make sure that the machine counted them correctly. And then you can be pretty sure that those results are correct. As long as nobody stuck in an extra pile of those ballots, you can be pretty sure that that result is accurate. But now in the systems where you have touch screens, you're entering the vote on a touch screen, the computer is outputting what you voted. Another vulnerability, which is that it could output it a little bit differently, and most people don't check. You also have vulnerabilities where it's getting the totals. You have to make sure that it's adding it up right. And so there's a concern that what if some of the machines were doing one of two things? What if A, they were adding votes, and what if B, they were flipping votes? So in the one case, what if the election machine said there were extra votes? How do we know that that's not the case? You could certainly count the pieces of paper. What if it had outputted those pieces of paper and somebody had put them in a box, which would take some collusion? Or B, what if it actually recorded a Democrat versus a Republican? So how do you check? The final source of truth in an election is the actual voters. So if you can ask the voter how they voted and get them to sign an affidavit that that's how they voted, now you have some legal evidence that you could counter with. Now, the problem is, of course, we don't record how each voter voted. Secrecy is also important. So it's very, very important. And the key here is you have to have subtotals. You have to have a small enough precinct. So you have to have those precinct counts, because if you have a precinct that, say, only has 500 votes in it, it's actually practical to walk and knock on the 500 doors of the voters who you know voted. And you have that turnout information, which we're going to get to in a minute, because that's where the candidates can help us, is getting that turnout information. You might have 1,500 registered voters in a precinct, but only 500 of them voted. Well, the ones you want to talk to, if you're looking for either of those particular vulnerabilities, is the voters who did vote. Because you could do like Clint Curtis did in 2006. He had a precinct where, I'm just going to kind of make up these numbers. He had maybe 400 people who were Democrats who voted, but they only showed maybe 250 votes for him. Now, that's not exactly what happened in Clint Curtis's time, but he said it was around 60%, and he didn't believe that. So he walked and knocked on the doors of the Democrats who had voted and got affidavits from more of them than had voted registered for him in that precinct. And so that's an important distinction. It was a total number of affidavits that he had. It wasn't a statistical argument. It wasn't look at the polls. It was, this precinct, you only counted X votes for me. Well, I have X plus 10 or X plus 100 affidavits from people in this precinct who said they voted for me. Now you have legal standing because you have that plus however many. You've disenfranchised those people, and they have, sworn that they did vote. That can give you some legal standing. Now, to find those people, you have to look at the ratio of the turnout versus the vote. So if we're looking for a flip, that maybe those votes were counted, but they were flipped, you want to say, what was the turnout from your party in a given precinct divided by the results from your party in that precinct? And if the results are significantly less than the turnout for the same party, you can go and walk that precinct and talk to the people, and you might find evidence of a flip if that occurred. And by talking to them, if a flip occurred, you should find evidence of it. But you need to have the data to target that precinct. So what candidates can help us with is getting that turnout data, because you can go to most of the websites on most places and you can find the results and you can find the voter registration information, but the turnout data has not been released yet in most places. And some places are also more complete than others. Georgia is fairly complete in terms of the election results. Kentucky, which uses the same software, is very incomplete in terms of the election results. Now, a candidate, and I'm not an attorney and I don't know the rules in the different states, but a candidate or a party should be able to go to the Secretary of State and say, I want the voter participation history of the voters who voted in this election, November 3rd. I would like the absentees, I would like the election day voters, I would like the early voters and any other kind of voters, provisional ballots. I want all the breakdown of all the voters who voted in this election. I am a candidate. I should have standing to get this. And I think all you have to do is keep knocking on doors persistently saying, I'm a candidate. I want the voter participation history up to date for this election. Can you give it to me? If you get that, we have some volunteer data scientists who will help crunch the numbers and will help you target those precincts and see if anything looks off.
That sounds so helpful, Golda. I just want to pause for just 1 second because, man, you are a wealth of information and I so appreciate it. I just want to highlight what you said about being a candidate. Now, I want people to understand, because I have talked to some attorneys about this, and Ryan, please feel free to weigh in if you also have details. It does not have to be a candidate that got huge publicity in their race. It can be any candidate that was on that ballot. So in other words, if we bring up Kentucky, it doesn't have to be the McGrath campaign. Although, shout out to the McGrath campaign, you might want to look into some things. It can be anyone who ran in Kentucky, and that includes these, forgive me for describing it this way, tinier races that didn't get a lot of attention. Am I right?
I believe so. Again, I'm not an attorney, but they should have standing. They might only be able to get it for their district or their jurisdiction, but that's fine. That's very valuable data, because all we want to do is find one precinct to walk. You can't walk, 10,000 doors. That's too much. So all we're looking for is getting some data so we can narrow it down to one precinct that looks off and we knock those doors. Yeah, thank you for reaching out. And thank you, Erin, for giving that platform for candidates to know, because a lot of candidates are so focused on the race and they're working so hard, they don't have time to think about, and then there's data and what should I do about it? We really want to make that available to those candidates as a resource. And Ryan, I just want to say to you, I really appreciated what you said about being allowed to be somebody who searches for joy. I think it's really good to have rock bottom principles here that we can all agree on. And sometimes we can agree on principles and sometimes we can agree on concrete things. And those are two places we can anchor.
Absolutely.
So we talked about what happens if votes are flipped and how to catch it. Now, the other question is, what if votes were added? What if this election machine made up some voters and they aren't real voters? Or maybe what if some voters were registered who aren't real voters, and by some chicanery, those not real voters' votes were counted? What if that happened? And of course, and I want to be very clear, I'm not saying that happened, but if it did, how would we catch it? In that case, you might look for a party that had a surge in new registrations, like people who weren't registered and didn't vote in the last election, new people that show up on the rolls and who did turn out to vote according to the records. You could look for a high concentration of those new people who showed up to vote in this election but had not been registered in a previous election. You could walk those doors. And so that may also be worth doing because, for example, I believe, and again, I'm not an attorney, but I did consult with one. In Florida, you can't have a vacant lot with a mailbox as your residence address. That doesn't qualify as a residence. When you're going around to those doors, if you go to someone's residence address and it's a vacant lot, that's an issue that can be brought up with the Secretary of State. And if you find enough of those, maybe that is a serious issue. You are going to find some errors. We did find when we were examining voter registration rolls, sometimes these data is hand entered. Sometimes there have been errors in the total numbers, and sometimes there are just errors that can be corrected. And that's okay. We take them to the Secretary of State and we correct those. There was a handful of them that were maybe, registered to vote on, 1900, 01, and obviously that's just a placeholder for we don't know when they were registered. Maybe there was a data transfer. As we go through this, we might find errors. But what we're really looking for as a smoking gun is houses that don't.
I don't mean to cut you off on that real quick. I just have one quick question. When you talk about these kinds of errors, could that mean something along the lines of registering voters multiple times? Like if there were 8 Ryan Nelson-Cains in the county that I live in on the registry, would that be considered one of these errors that you're talking about?
I haven't seen any of those. We did see when we looked for voters with the same address, we did see huge clusters of voters with the same address, but I did consult with an attorney that was in Florida, and they might be protected categories who are allowed to use the governmental center as their address. So we do see some clusters of those, and we can't tell, of course, if they really are in that protected category because we don't really know anything more about them. But those are the only clusters that we found at this point.
Sure, and that could be, that could be anything as far as people who don't have a home who still have the right to vote, that have the right to use that.
What they are mostly is things like prison guards, police officers, sheriff's deputies, judges, people who, for reasons of security, they don't want to have their address out there. Now, of course, that might be a good place to hide voters. And and again, I don't want to make accusations, but it was surprising to me that there was more of those in Okaloosa County than any other county, even though the other counties are much bigger. But maybe there's a prison in Okaloosa County. I don't know. We haven't dug down into that yet.
Sure.
So there's a lot of things where you find kind of an outlier or an anomaly, and it doesn't mean that there's fraud, but it's something that you can investigate, you can question. You can say, why are there so many more of these in this location than that location? And, maybe you can even ask the county people for an explanation. Why do you have so many of these? But we can't, what we're looking for as a smoking gun is a name and a person and an address that was said to vote on election day, and you knock on their door and they say, I didn't vote. That's more of a smoking gun. And we have not yet found that, but we haven't knocked on very many doors. That's kind of what you're looking for if you're looking for padding of votes, is addresses that don't exist and people that don't exist, or people that say they did not vote. That's kind of what you would be looking for. So what we're trying to do is use the data to narrow down where to gather evidence, and then gather evidence directly from the voters. And that way we can kind of get past all of this supposition of wow, this looks concerning, this looks really questionable, we have all these polls, what does this mean? To well, here's a way we can test it, and here's a way we can verify. And I don't know what we'll find. It's reasonable to try to audit and verify. And so that's kind of what the project is about.
Now it's my turn. I have a question too, Golda, because you're such a good person to explain all of this. So as we're talking about the different things that one could see, what about, and I won't mention the race, but I have heard of an incident where somebody voted by mail. They said they voted by mail, and the data said, no, they voted on election day.
That's a good question. And I think in that case, you dig a little bit more, where if you find one anomaly, it's kind of like when you're looking for gold and you find a little flake. It's okay, well, let's see if there's a vein down in there, because nobody's really going to get super excited about one voter who it seems like the recording was off. But if you find one, see if there's more. And if all of a sudden you find 10 or 20 or 100 of these voters, then something is fishy. And do you find more of them in one party than another? Do you find more of them in one location than another? And then you can dig down for the reason.
I just want to, as a quick interjection, Okaloosa County does have a prison. It's the third largest state prison system in the country, with 24,000 employees, and approximately 90,000 inmates. Just so we're all on the same page with Okaloosa County.
Great, fantastic. So that's probably why there's so many governmental center registered addresses in Okaloosa County. That makes sense. So those are the kind of things we're trying to get some volunteers to do, where the data people are looking at the data, and then we can get some, non-technical volunteers to kind of just pin down those things. This looked funny. Why is this? And they can search that. So perfect. Thank you. You want to volunteer with us, Ryan?
And then, yeah, right? And then how did that news hit you, Golda? I just have to kind of get, like, from your perspective, there's the people like me who don't understand technical anything, or data or what have you, and we just freaked out seeing that Lindsey Graham had contacted people to throw out votes. But how does that work in the data specific mind, if you will?
I mean, I don't worry too much in terms of the data of what people are saying, except that basically what that means is it's a red flag that if he is possibly saying to throw out votes, then we need to look at absentee voters and turnout. And we might need to look at people who, according to the records, did not vote. We could ask some people who are registered, who the record says they did not vote, and ask them if they did in fact try to vote. And I want to give a shout out to Democracy Counts, because they made a tool for doing that, which is called wanna.vote. And if you go to wanna vote, like WANNA.vote, that's a place where you can anonymously attest to whether you voted, whether you attempted to vote, what happened when you did that. That's a great tool for gathering that data. I think you might even be able to do that online. We could even do maybe some phone calls and enter that data. But one way or another, we want to basically then go survey those people who the record says did not vote, and see if some of them say that they did try to. And of course, then you get into that big issue of, was it lost in the mail? Was it thrown out? How did it manage to not get there? And don't know if we're going to be able to, change elections, but I think if you can display a pattern, my hope is that you could get some of these insecure machines thrown out. Maybe they're saying that it never got there, then that could become a suit maybe for the post office, depending on when they attest to have mailed it. If they're saying, and the ones that, if they did throw them out, if, and this is a big if, Lindsey Graham or whatever did get those ballots thrown out, there should be a record somewhere that they arrived and then were thrown out. There should be a paper trail or some kind of trail that occurred. And that would then be some matter for some kind of a suit, I would think.
Absolutely. Okay, one last one, just because it's kind of a burning question. Well, maybe not a question, maybe an endorsement that I'm looking for. Do you think that I'm right about Georgia really wanting to lean heavily into voting by mail and having paper ballots?
Do you mean that it's a good idea to have paper ballots?
Bingo.
Yes. Yes, of course. I mean, it's always a good idea to have paper ballots, because paper ballots that were hand marked is a way to verify the intention of the voter. Because it's not the intention of the election machine, it's the intention of the voter. So you have to have a record of that original voter intention. And paper ballots are, much harder, that are hand marked, are much harder to simulate or fake than, just some numbers inside a computer. So it's always better to have hand marked paper ballots. And I absolutely agree, everyone in Georgia should vote, by mail, or maybe not by mail, maybe early in person. However you can do it, where you make sure that piece of paper gets in, and make sure that it gets recorded that it is in, because you should be able to record that it's in.
So I just want to be clear on one thing here. Should they or should they not use a Sharpie?
That I don't know. No, that was. I live in Arizona, and we actually have really good recorders, and I'm very sad that Dillian Fontes might not be our recorder now, but he's actually very, very good. So if I can interject one thing that I know is a little bit of a digression in terms of the importance of having these elections. This morning, my other interested in human rights, and I was talking to our volunteer who's in Nigeria, and she was explaining how there was a group of people, of protesters sitting up on a hill, and all of a sudden, all of the lights went out, all of the billboards that normally are lit, all went out, and all the security cameras went out, and then the army shot into the group and killed many people that the government still has not acknowledged. So having a responsive government is much more important than people realize. These are young people who are protesting the anti-robbery unit, which is known as SARS. It was a big anti-robbery unit that went rogue and just started killing people and committing robberies. They would basically just come up to a young person with a nice car, kill them, and drive away in their car. And so that's why the young people in Nigeria are protesting. And the government has not, they did say they would disband the SARS unit, but they are also cracking down on the protests, and they have not been responsive to a lot of the young people. And what Ijamari told me is that they don't turn out to vote very much because in Nigeria, it's very dangerous to go vote. You go vote at the polls and you could get hurt. It's often a violent location. I just think that people here have to realize how important the elections are, how important it is to defend our vote, and then also to defend democracy around the world, because other people are putting their lives on the line for democracy. You know, we just have to get off our butts, and other people are risking their lives to either vote or protest in order to get, representative government. I just think that it can be a matter of life and death. People may not all realize that yet.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I personally feel more than ever, given everything we've seen, given all the accusations, all the confusion, all the planned confusion in certain cases, that I really appreciated when I voted early by mail at a drop box, so I didn't rely on Louis DeJoy. I really appreciated being able to track my ballot and being able to see that it was accepted without error, that it was counted. It just feels real important to do that.
Yes. Yeah. No, vote early enough that you can track that it was accepted. I think that's very, very good advice. So great. No, this was super to be able to go through all these details. Nobody ever wants to hear about all these details, Erin. So thank you for listening.
Oh, we do. And Ryan, I know that you and I both want people to be able to reach Golda. Now, Golda, what should they do when they reach you, and how do they find you?
Good question. We have a site called, you can just go to cooperation.org. This is all about helping people cooperate. And a friend of mine happens to own that domain. So if you go to cooperation.org, cooperation.org, you'll see a link that says Ask the Voters. And that has all the information about the project, and it has links to how to volunteer. It should have information about how to email me or one of us for help. So that would just be the thing to remember, is just cooperation.org. And if for some reason that doesn't work, you can find me on Twitter.
I'm going to pin that, listeners, to our profile here. So please go ahead and check in at a plan for that. It's a new account. Please migrate over to the new account at a plan for that pod.
I follow you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Golda. And Ryan, where should people subscribe to our podcast? YouTube, Spotify, all the places.
Absolutely. You can go to Apple Podcasts. You can go to Podbean. You can go to wherever it is that you get podcasts. It'll be there.
Excellent. And we're looking for new listeners, and we're looking to welcome the old ones back. We have some exciting things in the winds. Stick with us for a short break. Golda, I want to thank you so much for coming on and for giving us a really great detailed explanation, because I know that that's what everyone is needing right now.
Thank you, Erin. And thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on, Golda. It was good to talk to you again.
I'm John Ossoff, and the path to recovery is clear. First, we listen to medical experts to control this virus. Then we shore up our economy with stronger support for small businesses and tax relief for working families. And it's time for a historic infrastructure plan to get people back to work and invest in our future. We need leaders who bring us together to get this done. And that's why I approve this message.
Oh, some breaking news here from Weijia Zhang and the, I hope I'm saying that right, I'm sorry, and CBS. Sounds like experts are predicting to Vice President Pence that we could have 2,000 deaths per day by Christmas. That seems to be a pretty conservative estimate. It may be sooner than that. I don't want to bring the mood down, but I mean, if you're listening to this, I know if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already taking a number of precautions, and you may even be missing holidays with family members. But it's important to remember that the sacrifice that you're making is important to the society that we live in, and it's important to making sure that even though we miss this holiday, that there's other holidays that we can celebrate without the sadness of knowing that it was that holiday that caused the loss of life. So as hard as this is, and it has been hard, it's important to remember that we're doing it for a reason, that even as hard as it's been and as hard as it will continue to be, We do this because we need to do it. We do it because there's a lack of action in the federal government that needs to happen. There's a lack of action from state governments because of the lack of action of the federal government. And as unfortunate as it is that we have to do it this way, we're doing it this way to take care of a lot of people that we care about. So just keep that in mind as we move into the holiday season.
I am saddened at hearing that. Obviously, I don't know who wouldn't be. But I also want to add a special call to leadership and to media. Whoever may or may not get this message, it's vital. You really have to put the nation together, because I'm going to tell you, Ryan, I thought that we had a chance back in January. I really did. And then as soon as it became a political statement about whether or not you wear a mask, I looked at my husband and I said, we're screwed. If that is the way that this is going to go, there's no hope. So please, you have time to reverse course. This is not political. This is not a statement. This is a statement of protection of fellow human beings. So media people, get it together. It is not time to rise up and refuse masks. Everyone needs a mask. Everyone.
And even like if you're listening to this and you're an employer, if you hire people, if you're a manager, it's really time to start thinking about making sure everybody has the tools to work from home. As somebody who isn't allowed to work from home, who is high risk, this is something that's really near and dear to me. It's really scary to me to go into work every day knowing that this is a possibility. So reach out to your people, make sure your people are set, make sure that everybody knows that it's you have the capability, that they have the availability to do that, and then support them, because the mental health side of this is really tough. It's hard to stay focused. It's hard to work hard. It's hard to go into a workplace that, some people might feel like that maybe their life isn't valued the same way that their output is valued. Make sure that people know that. We've got to make sure that everybody knows their own value here. And it's important that we communicate that to people.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because honestly, even though we're focused on Georgia and I'm so excited to hear about how we can organize, it ties in, right? I mean, this election in Georgia couldn't be clearer, and they are making a case for it right now. Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. It literally is, do you want health care? Do you want people who are going to make sure that you survive this pandemic? Or do you want people who try to sell their stocks and make as much money as they possibly can while lying to you and trying to take your vital health care?
And not just while they were trying to take your health care. That wasn't the only thing that they were doing there. They were downplaying this virus. They were helping the president downplay this virus. So they didn't want to cause a panic, but they also wanted to make sure that they had some time to sell things off before the panic really set in, before things really closed down. Doug Perdue, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. He's worthless. Perdue and
David.
Kelly Loeffler. David, thank you.
You could say it.
It's
yeah.
Look, I want to forget about these people so badly. I want to make sure that these people are so far beyond the public consciousness that we don't ever have to speak their names again unless they're in the paper for getting arrested and brought to justice for these crimes. But look, the important thing to remember is this, is that it only works, it only happens if everybody's doing the job, if everybody's doing the work, if everybody's making sure that they are listening to the people on the ground, not just diving in. This is something that we lost this last week, but I want to reiterate this again. We need to have the humility in this work to be able to go down there and take direction. We need to have the ability to say, I'm not here to save, I'm here to serve. I'm here to work. And I'm here to take direction from the people who know what they're talking about. I'm here to listen to what people need. And I'm here to make sure that those people tell me what they want me to do within that need. Sometimes that's going to be nothing. Sometimes it's going to be, we got enough bodies today. Wait till tomorrow. Wait till somebody needs a break. Be the relief. If we have an unending wave of people, there's no way the Republicans can match it. They're all still fighting this election fraud mess. They're all still trying to make sure that Trump can steal the election in Wayne County and Michigan. It won't matter. They're going to depress their own turnout. We can't control what they do. All we can control is what we do. And that means we have to sit, we have to listen, we have to do the work when we're told to do the work, and we have to be ready to do the work when we're told to sit down. Come off the bench, next man up. When somebody's tired, when somebody needs a break, you got to be there to pick up the slack. When the person in front of you is tired, you grab the rope, grab an oar. It's time to row. The only way that we're going to win the Senate, the only way that we're going to break even in the Senate so that Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote in the Senate chamber is if we all grab an oar. Like I said, what that means is you've got to be next man up. There's way too many people down there right now, way too many cooks in the kitchen. Listen to Stacey Abrams. Listen to Stacey Abrams. Listen to people around Stacey Abrams that are directing traffic. Those people know what they're doing. They know Georgia. They've built this. They turned Georgia blue. All we have to do is follow their lead. That's all we got to do.
Yes, I love it. And as someone who volunteered on 9 campaigns, I am going to tell you what. Someone very wise told me, Erin, don't do this. Volunteer your heart out for 3 and then find 3 more volunteers who will find 3 more volunteers who will find 3 more volunteers. So I'm going to add on to Ryan by saying, hey, you volunteer, but then find 5 more people to join you, okay? Because we're building an army of progressives.
And an army needs leaders, and the leaders are making themselves known. If you want to be a leader, that's great. The time for that was 6 months ago. The time to be the leader was 6 months ago. Right now, we need soldiers. It's really sorted out. If you want to get involved, that's great. If you want to be an organizational figure in this, awesome. More power to you. But right now, we just need you on the ground. Right now, that we need people in the boats. That's all we need. We just need more bodies. We just need availability.
That's exactly right. And Georgians are friendly. I'm enjoying volunteering, and I know you are too. So I want to just close out by saying, you guys, we got this. We've got the tools that candidates can request their data, right? If there's any questions. And after today's news with Lindsey Graham, I have questions. How about you, Ryan?
Absolutely, I have questions. I have more than questions. I've got demands. I've got some things I want done.
Yes, hit us with your demands. Come on, Ryan, pump us up, just like I know you always do.
Look, I don't want to take too much longer with this because I've already stated my opinions on Lindsey Graham, but the guy's a spineless coward. Lindsey Graham doesn't deserve to hold the lowest office in this country, let alone one of the highest. The fact that he holds the title of senator is a derogatory thing to the title of senator. Lindsey Graham is below the level of anything that should qualify as a senator, and anybody who gets compared to Lindsey Graham from here on out should be someone that is automatically disqualified for the office that they're seeking, regardless of what that office is. If anybody reminds you of Lindsey Graham, it should be an immediate red flag. There is nothing redeeming about Lindsey Graham. And you know what's even worse about that? It's the fact that he's completely indicative of everything that's wrong with the Republican Party. They're all unfit to be leadership. They're all unfit to be in office. They're all unfit to do the job that they're trying to do. And to be honest, I don't even know what that job is. I don't know what their principles are. I don't know what they believe the purpose of government is. I don't know what they want to do. There's nothing within the things that they're trying to do that exudes any kind of purpose at all other than to make life harder for people. And if you want to make life harder for people, if you want to make life harder for yourself, vote Republican. That's the best way to put a roadblock in your life, to make your life a living hell from the form of government that we have, is to vote Republican, because they're going to make it more difficult for your life to get better every step of the way.
I bet everyone heard me clapping. That is amazing. All right, you guys, I'm pumped up. We're fired. We're ready to go. Let's do it. Let's elect Democrats. Flip those Republicans right out of power.
Absolutely.